because it's discriminating against people who have same-sex attraction, or it discriminates against LGBTQ people, because if they choose to seek out help for reducing their sexual behaviors, well, they're not allowed to. Our big brother government says, no, we're going to choose what kind of counseling you get to have or receive, and it's this kind of counseling only. Whereas as a heterosexual, I have the full range of options if I want to seek counseling for any sexual behaviors that I want to address, and that's its inherent discrimination in this law. And I think actually that's going to be a very interesting court case should a person who is attracted to somebody of the same sex, but simply wants to reduce, maybe not the attraction, but wants to reduce certain behaviors around that attraction, they can launch, I think, a Section 15 discrimination charge against this law and say, hey, why is it that Parliament thinks that they can police what options are available to me, an autonomous consenting adult seeking the kind of help that I want, but they don't do it for a heterosexual person? I think that's a legitimate question.
Adam Soos here for Rebel News with an update on our Ban Bill C4.com campaign. C4 is now the law of the land, and it was pitched as a conversion therapy ban, something that most people would probably be in agreement with. We are pro-freedom and against coercive treatments of any kind. But that sort of conversion therapy was already illegal in Canada. Bill C4 is riddled with vague, ambiguous, and troubling language that marginalizes both people who might want access to information and alternative perspectives in the LGBTQ, as well as opens up traditional faith communities to potential attacks, persecution, and even imprisonment by government authorities. To break down the troubling Bill C4, I'm joined by Director of Law and Policy from ARPA, André Schutten.
Well, thanks for having me, Adam, first of all, and it's good to be on the show. And I'm glad you're drawing attention to this, because not nearly enough people are concerned about what Bill C4 did to the criminal code. Of course, as you've mentioned, it's not just a bill anymore. It is, in fact, the law. We're now talking about Section 320 of the criminal code, right? And the criminal code is the heaviest tool in the government's tool shed when it comes to a forceful law. And what this one does is it defines conversion therapy much, much broader than any traditional understanding of what conversion therapy is. It goes to questions of values, and it's defined so broadly as to include counseling, non-coercive voluntary counseling between consenting adults and teenagers. And that's the big problem with it.
Yeah. And there is some extremely troubling law. As I mentioned, I was telling some lawyers about this bill when it was a bill just before it was passed, and they didn't quite believe me, so they pulled up the law in front of me and read it, and they said, oh my gosh, like this can't be enforced. They hoped that it might just be virtue signaling or something along those lines, but I don't think that there'd be this great concerted effort. There was two versions of this bill effectively before that were voted down, and now this one was pushed through without opposition. What can you maybe just break down legally, what is some of the extremely troubling language, some of the troubling definitions that should make all Canadians, regardless of your background, concerned about this law?
Yeah, for sure. So to be clear right up front, let me say that every Canadian, I think, would agree that coercive conversion therapy should be banned. In fact, to my knowledge, you wouldn't be able to get away with a coercive form of conversion therapy today. Certainly medical colleges would prohibit it and have prohibited it. And coercion, torture, non-consent in medical circles is all illegal already. So the problem with this one, of course, is that it says that any practice, any treatment, any service that's designed to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression, that those are illegal. So it's, first of all, one directional. And note that in the definition, there's no reference to torturous practices or to coercive practices or even to therapeutic practices. It's any practice, any treatment, or any service, very broad there. But it even includes in the definition references to simply reducing non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior, or reducing a person's gender expression that doesn't conform to the sex assigned at birth. There's references to terms like cisgender or non-cisgender, and these are like new concepts that really haven't been, they're not defined in the law, and that's very troubling. I mean, what that results in would be somebody who is having a non-heterosexual behavior that they do want, of their own volition, they want to address. Well, they won't be able to find that help anymore, because this law says any help on reducing a non-heterosexual sexual behavior is illegal. You can't offer that help anymore.
And so is that limited only to like people who are in a position of authority? Or if I have a friend who calls me up and says, listen, I'm starting to have this sort of inclination, but it's not something I want to do. Let's say they're married, or that's not the lifestyle they want to live. And they call me up and they're saying, listen, is there any chance you could give me some advice? Or what does your faith teach on this? Would I be breaking the law if I were to offer them any sort of counsel in that direction?
Well, the law is really vague. And so as a lawyer, I'd say, well, looking at this law, I couldn't give you a firm answer one way or another. And that's a big problem. What would be illegal for sure, I would say, is that if you said, look, I can't help you because I'm not qualified as a counselor, but hey, you should go talk to my pastor. He's going to have wise counsel for you. Well, that's promoting or advertising so-called conversion therapy, and that would be criminal. That's subject to up to 2 years in prison. So yeah, those kinds of discussions are all now under this. There's a dangling sword above us, and for people who are pastors or professional counselors, people who are in any of the faith communities that hold to a traditional view of sexuality or of a particular sexual ethic, they're all now under a chill from this law. And that's putting it, frankly, mildly. It's more than just a chill, I would say.
Yeah. Well, and so just so I understand then, for people out there, so this is clear, legally, if someone says, hey, do you know like a solid pastor or somebody I can talk to? Let's say this is a person who's considering transitioning, and they're like, listen, I'm all about informed consent, and they say they want to talk to an imam, a pastor, a priest, and then some LGBTQ activists and their doctor, and get a full array of information before they make that life-changing decision. Anyone offering advice that doesn't encourage them down that path would be breaking the law, but people who encourage them down that path are okay?
Yeah, I mean, there's a clarifying section in the definition that again is very vague. It's convoluted, but it says, well, as long as you're open-minded about it, they talk about any exploration of a development of an integrated personal identity is okay, but it requires that you not have an assumption about what should be preferred. So again, if this person wants an honest opinion from somebody who's on the other side of an issue, well, you don't go to them to say, hey, give me an honest opinion, and they say, well, do whatever you want. No, that's not an honest opinion. You want somebody to say, no, this is really what you should do. You should really go in this direction. Well, if somebody urges a particular direction or a particular path to follow, and it's not in line with the religious commitments of our current government reflected in this law, and this is a very religious law, then if you're out of line with the religion of our parliament, then you're going to be on the wrong side of the criminal law here.
And I have heard, just to make this practical for people out there, I've had a number of examples proposed to me of what could theoretically be illegal. And as you mentioned, this is very unidirectional. One of the examples proposed to me was, let's say you have an 11-year-old daughter, and you're like, well, I want you to wait until you're 12 to wear makeup, let's say. That's fine. If you have an 11-year-old son, however, and you say the exact same thing, that could be deemed as reducing the non-heteronormative behaviors, and then that could be considered an offense?
Yeah, it's again really troubling about this definition, because it's actually a pretty sick irony about it, is that in the preamble to the bill, they talk about rejecting stereotypes. But in order for this bill to make any sense, in order for this law or definition to make any sense, it requires actually the strictest of stereotypes to be imposed on what it means to be a boy or a girl, what it means to be a man or a woman. And that's a good example that just brings to light that inherent contradiction in the bill, because it says, one form of conversion therapy is simply reducing a person's gender expression that does not conform to the sex assigned to the person at birth. So you need need to have a strict stereotype about what it means to be a boy and to express your gender as a girl vis-a-vis makeup. You have to impose those stereotypes in order to make sense of this definition. But they've said they've rejected those stereotypes. It's a very convoluted, self-contradictory bill, and yet it's in our criminal code. It's policing the way we communicate with our children or with members of our religious community and so on.
Yeah, and I mean, at the very most innocuous level, it's extremely bad law, but I think that there is an ideological drive clearly, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. But first, I just wanted to, there was one other example that was brought up to me, and it just sounded absolutely surreal, but it seems to, by my reading of the law, be the case. So if you could flesh this out for me, but let's say there's an example where there's a married couple and one person in that couple is having an affair with a same-sex partner, and they seek counseling to try and reduce that behavior to be faithful to their spouse. By the letter of the law, is that now illegal in Canada for that counselor to offer that advice?
Yeah, again, on the face of the law, as we see it written here, that would be a form of conversion therapy because it's been defined so broadly. That's exactly right. And so in that sense, this is a perverse form of discrimination against the very people they say it's supposed to protect, right? Yeah. Because it's discriminating against people who have same-sex attraction, or it discriminates against LGBTQ people because if they choose to seek out help for reducing their sexual behaviors, well, they're not allowed to. Our big brother government says, no, we're going to choose what kind of counseling you get to have or receive, and it's this kind of counseling only. Whereas as a heterosexual, I have the full range of options if I want to seek counseling for any sexual behaviors that I want to address, and that's its inherent discrimination in this law. And I think actually that's going to be a very interesting court case should a person who is attracted to somebody of the same sex, but simply wants to reduce, maybe not the attraction, but wants to reduce certain behaviors around that attraction, they can launch, I think, a Section 15 discrimination charge against this law and say, hey, why is it that Parliament thinks that they can police what options are available to me, an autonomous consenting adult seeking the kind of help that I want, but they don't do it for a heterosexual person? I think that's a legitimate question.
I thank Andre for breaking that down. It's good to have a sober second set of eyes whenever we see troubling legislation like this. Having legal analysis and breakdown to make sure we're not misinterpreting anything is integral. And it seems like we certainly are not overreacting. This is a problematic law that needs to be addressed. If you're opposed to the law that has resulted from Bill C-4, go to banbillc4.com. And as always, I want to thank you all for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Soos. Hey guys, don't forget to go to banbillc4.com, sign our petition, and click our one-click politics link, which allows you to send an email to the people responsible for this troubling bill. Again, that's banbillc4.com.